Hello, welcome to Anita the Pedagogue channel. Today we continue with our English language lessons. We want to look at conventions of interviews. Conventions of interviews. How to write an interview transcript. For our lesson today, we would look at what interviews are. We would identify features of an interview. I'll give you a sample interview to look at. We will look at some useful statements or phrases for interviews, the use of question tags in interviews, tenses appropriate for interviews, and a sample examination question. Let's begin by looking at what interviews are. They are basically conversations in which one person asks the other questions on a topic or aspect of their life. So we usually see this when there are radio or TV interviews where you have a host or the interviewer interviewing a guest or an expert in a field, a politician, a celebrity on an issue. So anytime we see this, then there's an interview happening, basically a conversation. Let's go on and look at the features of an interview. What are the things you're most likely to see in every interview? These are the conventions of an interview. So I have a sample interview here where Denise, a media person, interviews Jenny, an up-and-coming actress. We're going to look at this interview and try and look at its conventions and learn from it. We have the speaker's names or roles on the left. So here we have the names of the two people having the conversation on the left. That is Dennis and Jenny. In some cases, you can have the reporter and then the name of the person, the interviewee. Also, the interviewer is the one who usually asks questions. So we see Dennis asking Jenny a lot of questions. For example, yes, this is quite a departure for you, isn't it? It is a question that Jenny needs to answer. So in the interview, we have the interviewer, the host, the reporter, asking their guest questions. And then we have the interviewee, who is the guest, replying to the questions. And so it should be noted that in the writing of an interview, the guests or the interviewee should be the one to speak mostly or to speak more than the person asking the questions. So when you are writing your interview, make sure that the responses or replies are lengthier or more compared to the questions that will be asked by the interviewer. So you see Jenny's reply. Let's go on and look at some other unique things about interviews. So there is the use of interjections or spoken language. So you see people giving some interjections like, oh, wow, well, So all these are interjections or some spoken language which would be good for you to include in your interview writing. Again, there's the use of expert language. You'd realize that there is a phrase here, the lead role, and this is peculiar to the cinema industry. So anytime you're writing an interview, your vocabulary is very important. You need to use the right registers appropriate for the issue that you are talking about. It is also possible to have some informal or friendly language in an interview. So you would see this statement by Jenny. Me, oh, I carried a sponge to the injured guys. No, seriously, I play one of Tom's wives. So this is a bit of a drift off, but it is okay to include just a sentence or two of such. Remember, this is a standard examination and you need to use very formal English language. Also, there is the use of some punctuations and a lot of ellipses. The use of exclamation, the use of the dash, and obviously the question mark because one person will be asking questions. So be careful to use punctuations appropriately when writing your interview. Well, you can also add actions of the interviewer or the interviewee in the brackets. An example is, should the interviewee laugh? You could put that in brackets by saying laughs and then continue with whatever statements or inputs that interviewee is making. And this will make your interview very realistic. So these are basically some of the features, the main features of an interview you should look at. Anytime you write an interview, be sure it includes these informations. Let's look at some useful statements or phrases for interviews. So, there are some phrases for agreeing, phrases for disagreeing, phrases for emphasis. So let's look at the phrases for agreeing. For example, I'm afraid I agree with you. That's for sure. That's so true. Exactly. No doubt about it. I have to side with you on this one. These statements and phrases show agreement. Now let's look at some phrases for disagreeing. I would say the exact opposite. I'm afraid I disagree. No, I'm not so sure about that. That's not always the case. That's not always true. Not necessarily. So these phrases are phrases that you can include in your interviews to show a disagreement. Also, there are some phrases to show emphasis. Examples are certainly. I want your listeners to be in no doubt. Let me be clear about this. Let me tell you. Purely and simply. So these are great phrases that you can include in your interview. Let's move on and look at some question tags that can be used in interviews. So quickly, a question tag is usually a short question used at the end of a sentence. Question tags are not the questions, but are used to ask for agreement or confirmation. So there are two types of question tags in English. We have the negative question tag. That's if the sentence is positive, then the question tag is negative. Example, you are sick. And here's the question tag. Aren't you? So, once the statement or the sentence is positive, your question tag would be negative. That means it will usually contain no or not. Now let's look at the positive question tag. Usually when the sentence is negative, that is if it contains not, then the question tag is positive. Example is, you are not sick, are you? So this is just by way of introduction. Now let's look at some question tags that we could use in our interviews. These are not acceptable terms, are they? This is a scandal, isn't it? You know the secret, don't you? It was done again, wasn't it? So it is very important to use some question tags in your interview writing because interviews are usually more of spoken language and you see a lot of question tags in spoken language, so it would be good to include some in your interview writing. Now let us look at some tenses for interview writing. So usually you could use varied tenses based on the questions that you are asking. You could cut across the present, the past, and the future tenses, but usually the present tense and the present progressive or continuous tense is dominantly used, okay, based on the issue being discussed. And I would like for us to look at the present tense. It is used to talk about the present and to talk about the future. We'll focus on the present. So some examples here is, I'm here to talk to Dr. Copeland. There are so many issues on maternal mortality. So these are examples of some present tense. It communicates that you are speaking presently to the person, like in interviews. Also, there is the present progressive or continuous tense, which is used for an ongoing action in the present. And some examples are, I am talking today with Mrs. Suarez. I am speaking from my personal experience. So these are some examples of the present progressive or continuous tense which you can use when you're writing your interview. Unless, of course, you're making a reference to something in the past or asking a question in the future, then of course you don't need to use the present or the present progressive tense, but you need to be sure that you're using the appropriate tense, which is a future tense, or a past tense if you're asking for something in the past. So it is very important to get your tenses right when you're writing an interview. In paper 1 question 3, which is the extended response to reading, which is usually allotted 25 marks, you are asked to write one of these 6 text types: a letter, a diary, a newspaper article, a magazine article, a speech, or an interview. So you are usually given one of these text types to write. So you are likely to find an interview under this section. I would now show you a sample question where you'll be required to write an interview. The question 3 is usually from text C of the paper 1. Reread text C, the Wild Tigers of Rothenburg, in the insert and then answer question 3 on this question paper. So question 3, you are fretted following the release of Val's book about his experiences at Rothenburg and the work you have both been doing there. You are interviewed for a national television show. The interviewer asks you the following 3 questions only. 1. What does Rothenburg offer visitors? What might our viewers like about Rothenburg if they visited? And what sort of thing could they do there? Bullet point 2. Can you tell us about the various different people and animals associated with the Rothenburg and how you feel they and you have contributed to Rothenburg's success? Bullet point 3. Rothenburg is located near SM. How and why has SM changed since 1976? Write the words of the interview. Base your interview on what you have read in text C, but be careful to use your own words. Address each of the 3 bullets. Begin your interview with the first question. Write about 250 to 350 words. Up to 15 marks are available for the content of your answer and up to 10 marks for the quality of your writing. Ensure you use the 3 bullet point questions only as much as you can. Also, base your interview on the ideas from text C, but use your own words. Interview writing is not difficult at all. you are writing a dialogue, and usually you are given the questions that you need to ask. So make sure you answer these questions accordingly, and remember that the interviewee should speak more. So when these questions are asked, the replies should be lengthy so that you would be able to match up the word limit that you are given. Let's quickly look at a recap of what we have done so far. Make sure you write your interview in a script format with the name of the reporter and the guest on the left. Make sure you use the semicolon, you leave a space before you go ahead and write the conversations that they are having. I would advise that, if possible, use the actual names of the interviewee and the interviewer. Also, make sure you include some interjections. Oh wow, these are all good to include. Be sure to use appropriate punctuations. Use ellipses, exclamation mark, dash, colon, question mark where appropriate. Also, use appropriate vocabulary to match the tags given. Ensure you are using some sophisticated vocabulary. Also, ensure your tenses are appropriate. Ensure you use primarily the 3 bullet points given in your question 3 of the paper 1. This brings us to the end of our lesson. I hope this lesson was useful. Put in your comments and questions and I'll respond to you. Do like, share and subscribe to this channel. Until I come your way again, keep learning and be the best version of yourself.